It has been a while, I know. So welcome back on Althistory Luxembourg. Today we are going to talk what if the Vikings stayed successfully in North America. So this will in particular include regions of Canada and maybe even some parts of what we know today as the United States. So without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, we all know that the Vikings, or Vikings, as you like to call them as well, came actually, let's say, first into America, so before Columbus. And they actually had settlements which were sustainable for some years until they disappeared for many reasons. So the first reason was, of course, that the natives were actually hostile towards them. So there have been proofs that the Vikings and the Native Americans had some war between them, and actually it ended up pretty bad for the Vikings. So the Scaravengi, I think, as they were called by the Vikings, they actually managed to drive them away from the place because, well, it was their land in the first place. So it's nothing that should be astonishing us. The second thing is also the climate change that was happening during that time. So at first, in the year around 1100, I think, it was during that time where the climate started to become colder. So the sea routes and also the climate around Iceland, Greenland were less sustainable. So without having Greenland as haven, or not haven, but as a port of contact and connection between Europe and North America, it was actually very difficult for them to sustain contact between those two parts. So of course, if you have climate change happening and also the places getting much colder, it will be much more difficult to have sustainable contact between those two places. So of course, the colonies, let's call them, or settlements in North America, they were on their own, and with the hostile native population, it was impossible for them to have, to be staying around for a longer time. So I think we should change two things. The first one would be that, let's say, the natives in Northern America would be interested in trade with the Vikings. Also, perhaps there should be a different approach from the Vikings. We know they were mostly, of course, traders, but also they were not really the nicest people. So maybe if we would have a different approach from both sides, it could lead into some agreements, and maybe with the trade there could also be a trade of brides, which was actually a thing during that time. So if you traded, let's say, some territories or some high valued goods, it was actually very often the case that the daughters of some high chiefs or dukes or kings or counts, they were traded as well. It was seen as a part of agreement and also as part of acceptance, even leading into alliances. So perhaps there could be some kind of intermixing or intermarriage between those two groups, the Vikings and the Scaravengi, or the natives of that area, which could then lead into something similar as the Métis or Métis people, which were actually, and still are, mixed Europeans and mixed Native Americans around Canada. I think the Crees, or who? No, I think they are called the Crees, but I'm not so sure about it. So feel free to correct me. So, having a sustainable Viking colony would mean that you need to interact in a very good way with the local native population, because if you are not able to sustain good relations with them, then you are in a huge trouble, because first of all, the Vikings did not have the manpower and also not the economic means to go there and invade everything in Northern America. And also this imaginary colony of Vinland would not really become a thing, simply because there were not enough people to sustain, and also maybe the colony was not so attractive. So if you want to have a Vinland-like colony, you need to have a lot of turmoil around Scandinavia and also a lot of political dissidents or refugees who would then choose to go over there, or also maybe, let's say, a lot of sicknesses that would lead into a collapse almost of the European part, where people would see the Finland as a very attractive region. And also maybe because of the farmland, let's say that during war or other crises around Scandinavia, you would have a lot of people who would then hear about Vinland, and they would actually take it upon themselves to go over there. Also, Icelandic people and the Norse Greenlandic people might be interested to go over there, for the simple reason that the climate is actually better. Farming could be something, realistically speaking, productive in that region. As the name also says it itself, the Vinland comes, I think, from the word wine. So maybe we could also see some wine production over there, but also only if the climate is as it is during that time, so that it doesn't change too much. Maybe if we give it some more time, let's say if we could postpone the climate change for 100 years, perhaps we could see already a different society taking place over there. So you would have probably the Vikings with the natives already intermixing. You would have some kind of caste system, maybe, like the Spanish Empire had established in their own colonies. So you could have, let's say, the noble population, which would be the first settlers, who would, of course, then intermix with the local Native American women. And those Native American women would come from very high chiefs or very good seen tribes, which also would give a lot of prestige and reputation to these Viking settlements, and which in turn would actually make them an integral part of this region. You would have a very good trade system in there, simply for the reason that the goods would be vastly different, because they would receive a lot of things from Europe, which the Vikings in return would see as, not the Vikings, the Native Americans in return would see as prestigious. And also the other way around, the Native Americans would bring new products into Europe. So Norway could, if they would still exist as such, have a very dominant position, and also they would be holding this colony as a secret, state secret. I think that maybe after some years or decades, probably the Europeans would discover what would be going on, and maybe colonization would take a place more rapid than in our timeline. But then we have also this other thing, probably with the trades between the Native Americans themselves and then going down south into the Aztec Empire and then the Inca Empire, they would get immune to the sicknesses of the Europeans. So, of course, this would imply a lot of things, and possibly it would also imply that maybe there's no Aztec Empire, maybe there's no Inca Empire, maybe there would be another kind of empire, having also different kinds of technology. The wheel could be actually a thing, maybe horses as well, and perhaps the Native Americans around the US would perform actually better than in OTL. So we would not talk maybe about the Aztecs or Teotihuacan or the Incas, but maybe we would talk, let's say, about the Iroquois or about the Creeks, or maybe also about the Pueblo. So these are a few outcomes that might actually happen. And I also think that the colony of Vinland, or the settlements, they would never totally stay European, and they would have to be a mixed colony, because otherwise there would not be any possibility for them to survive, except if they would have a lot of support in a military way, and also if there was the economic interest from the Norwegian crown to just go over there and then take everything for themselves. I mean, there's a difference between the area of Newfoundland and the areas around Mexico. In Newfoundland, you didn't have gold. You had maybe a lot of other things that were very, very valuable trade goods, but it was not gold. And also for the Spanish Empire around that time, there were other factors that also played a huge role. You had the competition between them and Portugal. You had also the trade route that was blocked to go to India, to China, Asia in general. So in this case, the interest in going to, mistakenly, to America was much higher than in the years around 1000. And even if you have a lot of turmoil and all of that in Norway, you would just have private people who could then sponsor those ferries to go to Iceland, Greenland, and then later on to Vinland. So the Vinland colony might perhaps stay, let's say, as an independent country, but even so, they would not be totally European in the first case. So they could actually be one of the first kinds of, let's say, mestizo colony or country. And also, as a result, with all the interaction going on between all the Native Americans, you would have a resistance of the European sickness. And also, just in case, if the Europeans establish other colonies in the Americas, you would have actually a very similar situation as in India. So where local princemen or princewomen would be supported by European powers, and only some territories would be directly controlled by the Europeans themselves. Or maybe we could go so far as to say that only some ports would be controlled, as it was the case in China, and maybe the rest would still be under control of the native population, leaving a very diverse world with more languages. Also, there would not be a US in such a case. And also we would have less white population in the world, globally. English would not be the main language. Maybe Norwegian, or actually any Scandinavian language, could be a competitor for the first place of a global language. So it would be spoken in Scandinavia, it would be spoken maybe also in the areas which we know today as Great Britain, Iceland, of course, Greenland, and maybe until the parts of Newfoundland and even further. It would also have an impact on the Native American languages. They would pick up some Norwegian or Scandinavian words, and in such a case there would also, culturally speaking, be some kind of Scandinavian dominance. So we would not have an Anglophone dominance in the world, but maybe we would have some Scandinavian, not really dominance, culturally speaking, but they would have a larger impact, globally speaking. So these are just a few ideas that I have for my part. Of course, you don't have to agree with all of that, but then again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can also give your own idea and impression. So that's it. I'm Althistory Luxembourg, and see you next time. Have a nice day. Don't forget to subscribe, give a comment, give a like, and watch all the other videos that I have on my channel. Have a great day.